Just the two of us. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Wonderful to have you with us. Those of you that might be watching live, those of you that might be watching this after it's been recorded. My name is Abdul Chohan. I'm the VP of Learning at Showbie, former principal, former CEO of a multi-academy trust. Done a lot of work with schools in many different places over the years, and I am delighted to have Kevan Lomas with us today from the Spencer Academies Trust. Kev is an associate executive principal at Spencer Academies. Have I got that right, Kev?
That's quite a mouthful, isn't it? But yes, that is my title.
Wonderful. So we've got 30 minutes. We kind of make these podcasts quite punchy. So we're going to kind of get straight into it. For those of you that don't know what Showbie is just a hybrid learning platform. It kind of does a lot of assessment and feedback things. If you want to know more about that, then absolutely get in touch or just go to showbie.com and have a look. But today's kind of conversation is very much about your role, Kev, and tell us. You can start off by telling us a little bit about the Spencer Academy Trust, number of schools, what kind of stuff do you do there? What's the one thing or the two things that you would want everyone to know about Spencer Academy's Trust?
Thanks, Abdul, and thanks for inviting me to join you. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So yeah, the Spencer Academies Trust, it's been established since 2011. It's growing. It's now got 24 schools. 8 of them are secondary, the rest all primary, including one special school. We've got a couple of outstanding schools within it, but the other, I suppose, standout feature around the Spencer Academies Trust is that we have a research school and a teaching school within our group, and that really does give us a lot of additional capacity for innovating practice and developing our practitioners and pedagogy. So we can draw on those facilities to really try out new things and build on evidence-based practice. So those are the standout things. I guess the other really important thing, and I was a principal at a large primary school with 850 children on roll, a maintained school in Derbyshire, and we were actively seeking a mat that we could join, and we looked at lots, but we chose the Spencer Academies Trust because we like the values, the principles that it stood for. It encourages schools to remain and to sort of sustain their own individual identity, but looks for opportunities for galvanizing best practice and sharing practice. And those are the things that I guess really like the heart of the trust itself.
Yeah, and I think that's a really nice thing for kind of for a mat to be able to offer from that perspective, like having that individuality, recognizing the differences among schools, because schools in many ways are kind of similar. There are some things that are kind of consistent throughout any school that you go to, but there's also some hugely creative kind of individual personalities that schools have, and different kind of ethos that schools have, and to kind of preserve those is a really nice thing for a mat to recognize and do as well.
Yeah. It's what's interesting is, as a principal, that was right at the center of what myself and my governing board were looking for in the trust that we were going to join. I've now stepped out of the role of being principal and joined the central school improvement team. And sometimes that individuality is quite frustrating when you're trying to move things forward. It's great on one hand, but it can be quite challenging, particularly when you're trying to innovate. Like, for example, we've developed our ed tech strategy, and that's including the use of Showbie at its heart, and just trying to get everyone on board with that without directing them to use that particular platform, but going through a process that convinces them that actually it is the right one to use. So I think it's very healthy, but it does slow that process of implementation down a little.
Absolutely. I'm the chair of a single academy trust, and we went through a process of kind of looking at mats to join, and what kind of features are we looking at, what kind of, I suppose, qualities that we're looking in a mat, and so on. And having that individuality was one. But I completely appreciate what you're saying about getting consistency across an organization can be pretty difficult when you offer that kind of flexibility as well. So I totally get that. So Kev, tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you get into education? What did you teach? You know, geographically, where are you kind of located?
Okay. So I'm even up until a couple of years ago, I was telling the kids in my own school that when I grow up, I'm going to be a vet. That was my life ambition, and when I was doing my A levels, that's what I fully intended to do. But circumstances meant that I failed my A level chemistry, much to my shame. And so my partner at the time, my girlfriend, was going to do teacher training. That was her calling. She was, it was her vocation, and I took her to interview. And then thought, I've either got the prospect of doing chemistry A level again, or I could go in and have an interview with her and become a teacher. So that's how I fell into teaching. But I've always had a strong science background. That's always been my passion. And I actually started teaching in 1987. That sounds a very long time ago now. But it was actually the year before the national curriculum was first released and unleashed, maybe, on English schools. So a very exciting time of development, and I kind of walked into that, and suddenly science had a bit more of a high profile in the curriculum. I really enjoyed leading on that, and I guess partly because of that background, I had quite a rapid promotion. I got my first headship at 30 and headed up a number of schools in Staffordshire around Tamworth.
Wow. Yeah.
So then I went to Derbyshire to become a school improvement advisor. I was looking really just to get to visit lots of different schools and see practice, and realised what a rich source of inspiration that was, and stayed there in the end for 11 years. It's one of those places, I think, where you can become an advisor. You have a lot of credibility early on because you've recently come out of leading schools yourself. You know what those issues are, and you can really offer some really pertinent advice. But I was very conscious that many of my colleagues had been there a long time, and it had been some time since they'd been in schools themselves. I didn't want to fall into that trap. So 11 years on, I realized I had. And although, I enjoyed the work I was doing, I knew I had very little capability or understanding of what the life of a head teacher really was like at that point. So I went back into headship. There were lots of other reasons as well. I missed being at the heart of a community. I think when you're an advisor and you're just dropping in, you don't feel you're really part of that. It's, and that mattered to me. So that's when I became the head at Hilton. There were some unique challenges around that. There aren't many schools there isn't another school in Derbyshire that's got 850 children on roll. So that was quite an exciting opportunity for me. And I stayed there for 6 years. As I say, took the school into the Spencer Academies Trust and then joined the central team myself.
Wow. That's quite a journey. I was going to say, man, you do not look that old, I have to say.
You are good, Abdul.
I just kind of being honest. 1987, I was year 8 or second year, as we called it at that time. But interestingly, I did study chemistry. I was a chemistry teacher for many years.
I should have come to you.
But I went to.
There's time.
I went to before I got into teaching. I worked for a pharmaceutical industry. I worked for Glaxo Pharmaceuticals, and I did research for them at some point. And then I lived with some teachers, and I kind of saw how much fun they were having, and then the rest is history. I kind of jumped into that. Wow, that's pretty awesome. So, how well prepared were you? I'm kind of asking this to people, and trust. Looking back, how well prepared were you for lockdown, partial openings, hybrid learning, all that kind of stuff?
Not well prepared at all. Obviously, I was still the principal at Hilton in the first lockdown. So I remember that week leading up to the kind of closure, that it was quite short notice, everyone needing to move to some kind of home learning offer. And it just highlighted for me a number of things. We were ill prepared for it. We had, science and technology had certainly been a passion of mine throughout my teaching career, and I'd kind of sought to innovate the use of technology in school. So there were things we were doing, but there were the practical challenges were just about logistics, about a lack of equipment, about a lack of training for staff and for parents and children, if I'm honest, in terms of how we could sustain that. But the most striking thing, and the learning from me early on, was how much I'd underestimated the capacity of my own staff team to embrace something that was really potentially very challenging, which I think in a different context they will have balked at. But because there wasn't an alternative, we had to move quickly, and we had to upskill people to use technology and improve the quality of the teaching and learning offer. It was kind of all hands on deck, and everyone just had to get on with it, and they did. And actually, there was quite a lot of professional learning from me and my senior team there about maybe sometimes we limit our expectations of our colleagues, and maybe it's about finding the need. So it's convincing, compelling, and then they will buy into it. So even our kind of technophobes within the staff were actually, making live videos and recording content and adding it to our website. That was very much how we solved the problem in the short term. We hadn't got a platform to speak of other than Class Dojo. So we had a mechanism for communicating with parents and students at home, but it wasn't really the vehicle for delivering content and marking and feedback and all the kind of bits that go, go along with really good practice. We were just uploading documents to a website and videos and signposting them.
I think you're absolutely right. The way educators, teachers all over the world kind of responded with very limited resources, in many cases, like no professional training or anything like that, was absolutely phenomenal. I've been telling a lot of people this, but I had a teacher from Rwanda, a head teacher from Rwanda, that joined one of my webinars at the time, because we were doing webinars like with Showbie about, how you could use this. And there was the free version of Showbie, and you could kind of get by with it, sort of thing. And this head teacher, I remember having a conversation with her, and literally overnight, she's in Rwanda, very remote. She managed to get the school kind of going online through people's phones and all this kind of stuff and so on in the families. And it really kind of spoke to me about the passion that educators have. They want to teach. They want their children to learn. And it was almost like any means necessary kind of thing. It's not really the technology. They want the technology to disappear and just work. But they want that passion to happen. So I think quite often, like at the moment when I've been speaking to kind of like local authorities or councils or districts in other countries and so on, the conversation around hybrid learning is kind of been around like the simplicity of the tools and making sure that it's just dead easy to use for teachers. So there's not a lot of energy being spent on click here, then click there and do this and do that. But actually the focus then becomes pedagogical. It becomes more like, hey, this is where the evidence is pointing us. So how do I kind of apply this using the tools and build some efficiencies into that? So I don't know what your thoughts are on kind of this whole hybrid learning stuff, your digital strategy for the trust. What does that look like? What kind of thoughts do you have around that?
Okay, so during this process of the pandemic, I migrated out of my kind of headship role and into the central team. So I was conducting conversations with lots of our other primary heads within the trust, talking to them about what they were offering, looking for examples of really effective practice. So that conversation happened soon after, or actually towards the end of that first lockdown, really just taking stock of where we are. And there was guidance coming out from the DFE then as well about, what was working well in terms of remote learning, and also about a kind of raising of the bar around expectations there. So that was quite timely. And as a trust, we decided to engage in a piece of work where we would actually start to pull together an EdTech strategy. Well, it was kind of two-pronged. One was the very short-term support and strengthening of the offer during the pandemic, but the other was mindful of actually what we want to do is put something in place that would offer us additional capacity and strengthen our teaching offer in the classroom going forward. So it wasn't just about the remote learning. And that's what I guess you're talking about in terms of that hybrid offer, hybrid teaching. So we looked at a range of different solutions and platforms. We looked at those schools who were making really good use of Class Dojo. There were lots of companies out there trying to develop their offer as well in terms of the product and what it could do for practitioners. But going back to what you've just said about simplicity, Abdul, and I completely agree with that. For me, the best test was how quickly could people learn to use this platform, and how quickly could they engage in a meaningful dialogue with their learners, and how responsive were the children to it. So those were really key measures for me, and that's really how we landed on Showbie. We looked at a range of devices. We wanted something that was easy and, again, simple to use and reliable, that wouldn't fall over. We looked at our infrastructure. We looked at the platform we would actually use to be the vehicle for delivering content and learning. And we pulled all of those things together. So we kind of, again, going back to what I said earlier about the context within the Spencer Academies Trust, we didn't want to impose this on people, but we wanted to share with them, a strategy that had some really strong evidence of good practice. And we engaged our research school as well to actually engage with us in a trial. So we could actually do an empirical study and look at whether these things do help with teaching and learning and really added value. And the research school have been amazing around that. They've helped us to ensure that we've that study's fair and that we've got some measurable output. And then we've shared that with principals. So actually, over time, schools have seen that and thought, yep, we'll have a piece of that. And so, although we've not imposed it on our schools, the number of schools who are now using it is growing on a daily basis.
Yeah. I do remember speaking to your research school earlier on this year, I think it was, and they were just talking about that study and so on. And I think that's really quite key. I mean, quite often, there is this conversation, hey, we're just putting shiny technology into schools and so on. I don't really think any kind of principal or anyone worth their salt chooses technology based on its shininess. But I think people do kind of think that actually there's some benefit in this. What is that benefit? That's the thing that people are trying to figure out. And having a research-based approach to this, so whether you're kind of looking at that from an assessment perspective, whether you're looking at that from a kind of like feedback perspective, I think there are things that technology kind of gives us and allows us to do that we simply just could not do without. There are efficiencies that kind of can be brought in. And the interesting thing for me is when I'm kind of speaking to trusts, is to kind of see their journey and what does that look like at scale. Because there's got to be bigger opportunities there.
Absolutely. And again, that study I mentioned towards the end of that first lockdown, looking at what was on offer across our schools, it also highlighted those real gaps. So for us, that was about teacher explanations and modelling, and it was around marking and feedback. Those were things that none of the platforms we were using at that time were really delivering on strongly enough, and that was really problematic. So we were looking for something that could really help us to plug those gaps. Yeah. And again, sometimes it's just an opportune or a chance conversation or a meeting with another colleague. I ought to give a shameless plug to Ricky Brown, who was a guy who was working with us just to help us with that initial review of what we were offering, but was also able to share with us some platforms that he had experience of using and some devices. And that's when I first came across Showbie. Okay. And I was blown away by what it could do and how quickly I could pick it up. But more importantly, how quickly some of my colleagues who are perhaps less willing to engage with technology and change were able to pick it up and use it. So, I watched Ricky sharing it with some of those colleagues, and within literally a few minutes, they were able to add content and start delivering lessons. And that, for me, was quite compelling.
It's definitely been my mantra. I mean, Yes, I've got this VP of Learning role now for the last 12 months, just over that with Showbie. But way before then, probably about 4 years of, or 5 years almost, of consultancy all around the world. Did projects with island communities in amazing places like the Maldives and Mauritius, as well as kind of some quite desolate places like Greenland and so on. And wherever I had the opportunity to kind of build a strategy that involved technology that's just going to work, I actually use Showbie and Socrative in those places.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. It was for no other reason than the simplicity and reliability of it and getting people on board. That was the key thing. Because quite often, I think historically with technology, we've often kind of, it's been a bit like gym membership. Schools have bought it, but not everyone's using it, kind of
We
thing.
know it's good for them, but it requires a bit of investment in the first place.
Yeah. But I think that that's changed. I do feel like, people that develop technology, including the likes of Showbie, developers, they kind of look at that simplicity and ease of use and all that kind of stuff, which was never really there before. You had to go on training courses to learn packages, and quite often it was like a number of sessions you had to do and all of that. And all that's kind of gone now. People are kind of just, it's intuitive that you measure the technology based on how easy it is to use, and does it direct me what to do next, and so on. And I think we kind of live in that era, and those kind of possibilities are there. Kev, we're kind of coming up to time, and these are always like kind of fascinating conversations for me. Couple of questions I still want to ask. Firstly, the research school stuff, all that evidence-based stuff that you're going to do, will that be published at some point? Where could people see it, or has it already been published?
We've done an interim review, which is and that kind of initial evidence of benefit and impact has been shared with our own principals, but the study will conclude at half term, and then will be published. So I can send you the links to all of that when that material is available.
Wonderful. And we'll put that out on Showbie. So anybody watching this, you'll be able to kind of find it on our Showbie channels on YouTube and on Twitter, and also on LinkedIn as well. That's wonderful. I'm sorry
to interrupt. Just to be clear, what we did is, because of the nature of it being a research project, we had to really narrow down. So we were looking particularly at how we could strengthen children's writing, which was, again, from our study, the bit that was hardest to do remotely, but also something which we knew we could potentially impact positively in the classroom when children were back in school. So the trial is very much about measuring the difference it makes to the quality of children's writing over time.
All right. Okay. I'm sure there'll be people out there that will kind of want to have a look at that and see what you did and how you did it and what the impact of that has been as well. So that's great. And finally, do you have any teacher stories? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, everyone's got teacher stories. When you've been in teaching for that long, there's always kind of, stories that we tell round the table in the pub kind of thing, or maybe, at a barbecue or something like that. Any teacher stories, anything that comes to mind that related, not related?
Lots come to mind, Abdul, but nothing I could definitely broadcast on your webinar. I think you're quite right, and it is the best job in the world. I thought about writing a book. I've kind of stepped down, so I'm doing 3 days a week. I almost went for early retirement, but I couldn't tear myself away. I do love the job so much. Probably some of the most memorable moments for me have been as the principal of my last school, and some of the communications I've shared with parents and that they've shared with me. But again, when you're the thing about being a principal is there's never any downtime, really. And if it's probably not, this is not good advice, folks, but if you pick up your emails on your watch or your phone and it's kind of past 9 o'clock at night and there's one pings in to head teacher at, it's best not to read it, because it's probably been written by someone who's had a glass of wine or two and is having a bit of a rant. And always good fun. I do have to say the parents at my last school were amazing, and I had very productive relationships with them. But sometimes you read these emails and you think, what planet are they on? But amazing things too. And, you know, I reflect back on some of the students who have been in my schools and what they've gone on to do. So some have gone on to be Olympic athletes. Some do amazing things in the world of science and technology. And for me, that's always been an element of pride. The fact that that small time that they spent with me may have done something to awaken that passion. So yeah, great stuff.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of always the case. Like, you come across students and you see them in years to come, and they're just doing absolutely amazing things. We had a student. Have I got enough time? We had a student, I remember, many years ago. I mean, the school that I was at is in Bolton. It's my hometown. And it was when the Afghan war happened many years ago, right? Not obviously the current situation, but we had this boy that joined our school, and he was like, you know, he managed to smuggle himself in through European countries on the back of lorries and all that kind of stuff. He ends up he ends up in the UK, ends up at our school. And this like 7-year-old, but we just started this iPod Touch program at the time. Before iPads, we'd given a device to each student, and he was like, you know, all over this kind of device and using it to translate. His English was not that great, and so on. But what you saw in this boy was this kind of like real desire to kind of learn. I'm in a new country, I'm in a new school, I've got my life. You kind of saw that preciousness. And now, I mean, it's kind of phenomenal. But you know, he graduated at university, Manchester University. He's published a book. You know, he's kind of out there, kind of doing a whole bunch of interviews with the BBC and so on. He's really fighting the cause for his people in Afghanistan and so on. But I'm kind of in awe of him every time I see him in terms of what he's been able to achieve. Yeah. And knowing, and he, you know, he mentioned the school and what the school had done for him in his book, which I thought was pretty amazing. But I just think sometimes, like, this is probably, I would say, the best job in the world, because like, you just don't know what you're preparing for the future, you know, the impact that you're having in there, and you're touching so many different lives and having so much impact on people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Kev, wonderful. Really kind of thank you for your time. I know busy people, busy time of the year and all of that. At some point, probably we'll chat again. You know, thank you so much for your time. And thank you for everyone that's joined us live or that might be watching this later on. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Good stuff. Thanks, Abdul.